Racist judge sides with white cops in court until the black woman reveals she's a U.S. attorney. Tasha Williams adjusted her crisp, navy blue suit jacket, a subtle power move in the courtroom's hushed atmosphere. As a U.S. attorney, she commanded respect, not just for her position, but for the unwavering integrity that radiated from her. Today's case, however, felt different. A simple traffic stop turned into an excessive use of force claim against two white police officers by a black man. The evidence was murky, the narratives conflicting. Tasha prided herself on objectivity, but a nagging feeling told her something was off. Leaving the courthouse, Tasha headed to her car. It was a sweltering July evening in Atlanta, the air thick with humidity. As she approached her vehicle, a sleek, black sedan pulled up sharply beside her. Two uniformed officers stepped out. Tasha Williams, one of them asked, his tone flat. "Yes," she replied, a flicker of unease creeping in. "We're going to have to ask you to step aside, ma'am." "For what?" Tasha asked, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "Routine questioning. There's been a report of a suspicious vehicle in the area." Tasha's unease deepened. This felt wrong. "Officers, I'm a U.S. attorney. I'm on my way home." She reached into her purse for her ID. Before she could produce it, one of the officers grabbed her arm. "That's not necessary, ma'am. We know who you are." The grip was too tight, the tone too aggressive. "You're making a mistake," Tasha stated firmly, pulling her arm away. The other officer stepped forward. "Don't resist arrest." "Arrest? On what charge?" Tasha demanded, her voice rising. "Disorderly conduct." One of the officers said. "This is ridiculous," Tasha said, her mind racing. This was happening because she was a black woman, alone, at night. The injustice was glaring. They handcuffed her roughly, ignoring her protests. As they shoved her into the back of their patrol car, Tasha felt a surge of anger, not just at the officers, but at the system that allowed this to happen. She knew this wasn't about a suspicious vehicle, it was about the color of her skin. At the police station, she was processed like any other suspect. Her U.S. attorney badge tucked away, useless. The humiliation was deliberate. It was a power play, a reminder that even someone in her position wasn't immune to racial profiling. Finally, after hours of detention, a supervisor arrived, looking embarrassed. "Ms. Williams," he said, "there's been a misunderstanding." Tasha stared at him, her eyes burning with righteous anger. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice laced with sarcasm. "We apologize," he mumbled. Tasha said nothing. She knew an apology wasn't enough. This incident had shaken her, but it had also solidified her resolve. She would not let this go. She would use her position, her power, to fight against the very system that had just humiliated her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the others who had suffered the same injustice, the countless black men and women who were targeted simply because of the color of their skin. She would make them pay. The sting of the handcuffs, the coldness of the holding cell, the sheer absurdity of the situation, it all fueled Tasha's determination. She knew this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern, a symptom of a deep-seated rot within the system. As a U.S. attorney, she had the power to investigate, to expose, and to prosecute. And that's precisely what she intended to do. The next day in court, Tasha faced Judge William Cartwright. He was a man of considerable influence, known for his stern demeanor and his strict adherence to the law, or so it seemed. As Tasha presented her case against the two officers, she noticed something unsettling in Cartwright's eyes. It wasn't the usual judicial scrutiny. It was something else, something knowing. He seemed almost amused by the proceedings, as if he already knew the outcome. The officers' defense was weak, their testimony riddled with inconsistencies. Yet, Cartwright seemed to dismiss the evidence, his questions designed to undermine Tasha's arguments. He focused on minor procedural errors, technicalities that had little bearing on the core issue of excessive force. As the trial progressed, Tasha's unease grew. Cartwright's bias was becoming increasingly apparent. He ruled against her motions, sustained objections to her questions, and seemed determined to protect the officers at all costs. It was as if he was personally invested in the outcome of the case. Tasha's mind raced. Was it possible that Cartwright was involved in some way? Was he protecting these officers for a reason? The thought was disturbing, but it wouldn't leave her mind. After the trial, which predictably ended with the officers being acquitted, Tasha confided in her colleague, Marcus. "Something's not right, Marcus," she said, her voice tight with frustration. Cartwright. He was acting like he was on their side. Marcus, a seasoned attorney with a pragmatic approach, listened carefully. "Judges have their biases, Tasha," he said. "It doesn't necessarily mean anything." "But it's more than that," Tasha insisted. "I felt it." He was almost gleeful when they were acquitted. Marcus sighed. He knew Tasha's instincts were usually spot on. "Okay," he said. "Let's look into it. We can review some of his past cases, see if there's a pattern." They spent the next few days poring over court records, analyzing Cartwright's rulings, and examining the cases he had presided over. What they found was disturbing. A disproportionate number of cases involving police misconduct had been dismissed, often on technicalities, just like in her case. There were also several instances where evidence seemed to have been suppressed or ignored. The pattern was clear. Cartwright wasn't just biased. He was actively protecting corrupt cops. But why? What was his motivation? Was he being bribed? Was he part of a larger conspiracy? Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. This was bigger than she thought. This wasn't just about a few road cops. It was about a systemic problem, a network of corruption that reached the highest levels of the legal system. And she was determined to expose it, no matter the cost. "We need to dig deeper, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "We need to find out what Cartwright is hiding." The fight for justice had just begun. Tasha knew she couldn't tackle this alone. She needed someone with experience, someone who knew the inner workings of the police department and the courts. She needed an investigator, and she knew just the man. Jonathan Pierce was a legend in law enforcement circles. He was a former homicide detective with a reputation for being relentless, a bulldog who wouldn't let go of a case until he had uncovered the truth. He had retired a few years ago, disillusioned with the corruption he had witnessed within the system. Tasha had worked with him on a few cases in the past, and she knew she could trust him. She tracked him down to a quiet cabin nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He was living a simple life, away from the chaos and corruption of the city. When Tasha told him about her suspicions regarding Judge Cartwright and the pattern of dismissed cases, his eyes lit up with a spark of the old fire. "You think there's something bigger going on?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "I'm sure of it, Jonathan," Tasha replied. "Cartwright isn't just biased, he's protecting someone. And I need your help to find out who." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. He had seen enough corruption in his career to last a lifetime. He had walked away from the force, disgusted by the way the system protected the guilty and punished the innocent, but Tasha's words resonated with him. He knew that if anyone could expose the truth, it was her. "All right, Tasha," he said finally, "I'm in, but this is going to be dangerous. These people won't hesitate to silence us if they think we're getting too close." "I know," Tasha said, "but we can't back down. We have to fight for justice." Jonathan smiled, a hint of his old self returning. "That's what I like to hear," he said. They spent the next few days discussing strategy. Jonathan's connections within the police department proved invaluable. He knew who to talk to, which doors to knock on. He started digging into Cartwright's past, looking for any hint of wrongdoing, any connection to organized crime. He discovered that Cartwright had a gambling problem. He was deeply in debt to some shady individuals, and there were rumors that he had been involved in some illegal activities in his younger days. This was a potential motive, a reason for him to be protecting corrupt cops. Jonathan also learned that Cartwright was close friends with a powerful local businessman named Victor Sterling. Sterling was known to have connections to the criminal underworld, and he was suspected of being involved in drug trafficking. This was a significant lead. As Jonathan delved deeper into the investigation, he uncovered a network of corrupt police officers who were working with Sterling. They were involved in drug smuggling, money laundering, and various other illegal activities. Cartwright was their protector, ensuring that they never faced justice for their crimes. The picture was becoming clearer. This was a massive conspiracy, a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of the city's power structure. And Tasha and Jonathan were determined to unravel it, no matter the risk. "We're getting close, Tasha," Jonathan said, his voice filled with excitement. "We're about to expose the whole damn thing." But they knew that they were walking a dangerous path. The people they were going after were powerful and ruthless. They wouldn't hesitate to use violence to protect their interests. Tasha and Jonathan were playing a high-stakes game, and the price of failure could be deadly. While Jonathan delved into the city's underbelly, Tasha focused on the legal front. She knew that building a solid case against Cartwright and his network of corrupt officers would require meticulous attention to detail. She needed someone who could navigate the complexities of the legal system, someone she could trust implicitly. That person was Marcus. Marcus was more than just Tasha's colleague. He was her closest confidant. They had worked together for years, their professional relationship evolving into a deep friendship. He knew her strengths, her weaknesses, and her unwavering commitment to justice. He was her rock, her sounding board, and her most trusted advisor. Tasha shared her findings with Marcus, explaining her suspicions about Cartwright and the evidence Jonathan had uncovered. Marcus listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He knew the risks they were facing, but he also knew that Tasha wouldn't back down. "This is huge, Tasha," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, this could bring down the whole system." "That's the plan," Tasha replied. "But we need to be careful. These people are dangerous. They won't hesitate to use their influence to silence us." "I'm with you, Tasha," Marcus said. "Whatever it takes, we'll bring them down." Marcus's expertise proved invaluable. He meticulously reviewed the evidence Jonathan had gathered, identifying crucial links between Cartwright, the corrupt officers, and Victor Sterling. He helped Tasha craft legal strategies, anticipating potential challenges and preparing counterarguments. He also provided crucial support in navigating the bureaucratic hurdles and political maneuvering that often hampered investigations like this. Beyond his legal expertise, Marcus offered Tasha emotional support. He knew the pressure she was under, the weight of the responsibility she carried. He was there to listen, to offer encouragement, and to remind her that she wasn't alone in this fight. "You're doing the right thing, Tasha," he said one evening as they worked late into the night. "Don't ever doubt that. It's not easy, Marcus," Tasha admitted. "Sometimes I feel like we're fighting a losing battle." "We're not," Marcus insisted. "We have the truth on our side. And that's the most powerful weapon we have." As the investigation intensified, Marcus became increasingly concerned for Tasha's safety. He knew that the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous things would become. He urged her to be careful, to take precautions. "We can't afford to take any chances," he said. "These people will stop at nothing to protect themselves." "I know," Tasha said. "But we can't let fear paralyze us. We have to keep pushing forward, no matter the risk." With Marcus's support, Tasha felt a renewed sense of determination. She knew that she had a team behind her, people she could trust with her life. Together, they would fight for justice, expose the corruption, and bring down the powerful individuals who thought they were above the law. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. Jonathan's street-level intelligence, combined with Marcus's legal acumen, was proving to be a powerful force. They were unraveling the threads of a complex web of corruption, exposing the connections between Judge Cartwright, the road cops, and Victor Sterling. Jonathan had discovered that Sterling's drug operation was sophisticated and well-organized. He was using a network of seemingly legitimate businesses as fronts for his illegal activities. Money laundering was being conducted through offshore accounts, making it difficult to trace the flow of funds. The corrupt cops were not just protecting Sterling. They were actively involved in the operation, facilitating drug shipments, intimidating witnesses, and covering up any evidence that threatened to expose their network. Cartwright's role was crucial. He was the linchpin, ensuring that any cases brought against Sterling and his cronies were either dismissed or manipulated to secure acquittals. He was effectively shielding them from prosecution, allowing their criminal enterprise to flourish. Tasha and Marcus meticulously documented every piece of evidence, every connection, every transaction. They knew that their case had to be airtight if they were going to take down such a powerful and entrenched network. They were facing powerful adversaries, people with deep pockets and a willingness to use their influence to crush anyone who dared to challenge them. One evening, Jonathan came to Tasha's office with a lead. "I've got something," he said, his voice low. "A witness. Someone who saw Cartwright meeting with Sterling." Tasha's eyes lit up. "Who is it?" she asked. "A bartender at a club Sterling frequents," Jonathan replied. "He's scared, but he's willing to talk if we can guarantee his safety." Tasha knew that protecting their witness was paramount. They couldn't afford any leaks. "Marcus, we need to arrange witness protection," she said. Marcus immediately set the wheels in motion. He contacted the appropriate authorities and secured a safe house for the bartender. They couldn't afford any risks. The bartender's testimony was explosive. He described several meetings between Cartwright and Sterling, detailing how they discussed case strategies and payoffs. He also identified several of the corrupt police officers who were involved in Sterling's operation. The evidence was mounting. Tasha and her team were getting closer to exposing the truth, but they knew that their every move was being watched. Sterling and his associates were not going to sit idle by while their empire crumbled. They would fight back, and they would fight dirty. One night, as Tasha was leaving her office, she noticed a black van parked across the street. She felt a chill run down her spine. She knew she was being followed. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, the van sped towards her, its headlights blinding her. She jumped out of the way just in time, narrowly avoiding being hit. The van screeched to a halt, and two men jumped out, their faces masked. "We're just trying to send you a message, Ms. Williams," one of them said, his voice menacing. "Back off. This isn't your fight." Tasha stood her ground, her fear masked by a steely resolve. "You're wrong," she said. "This is exactly my fight." The men smirked. "You're making a big mistake," one of them said. "You're playing with fire." They got back into the van and sped away, leaving Tasha shaken but undeterred. She knew that the threats were real, that her life was in danger. But she wouldn't back down. She had come too far. She was determined to see justice done, no matter the cost. The attempt on her life solidified Tasha's resolve. She knew the stakes were higher than she thought, but she wouldn't be intimidated. She was a U.S. attorney, and she would use every resource at her disposal to bring down this corrupt network. She doubled down on the investigation, working day and night with Jonathan and Marcus, piecing together the final threads of the conspiracy. They discovered that Victor Sterling's influence extended far beyond the city's borders. He had connections to organized crime figures in other states, and his drug trafficking operation was part of a much larger network. The money laundering scheme was intricate, involving a series of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Tracing the flow of funds was like following a labyrinth, but Tasha and her team were determined to find the source. Jonathan's contacts within the police department provided crucial information. He learned that several high-ranking officers were on Sterling's payroll, protecting his operation and tipping him off about any investigations. These officers were not just corrupt. They were dangerous, willing to use violence to protect their interests. Marcus's legal expertise was essential in navigating the complex financial transactions. He worked with forensic accountants to trace the money trail, uncovering a series of shell corporations that led back to Sterling. They also discovered that Judge Cartwright had been receiving regular payments from these corporations, further solidifying his connection to the conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. They had a clear case against Sterling, the corrupt police officers, and Judge Cartwright, but they knew that bringing them down wouldn't be easy. Sterling was a powerful man with deep connections, and he wouldn't hesitate to use every resource at his disposal to protect himself. Tasha knew that they needed to act quickly. The longer they waited, the more dangerous things would become. She decided to take the case to the grand jury, seeking indictments against Sterling, Cartwright, and the corrupt officers. The grand jury proceedings were tense and secretive. Tasha presented the evidence, laying out the intricate web of corruption, detailing the drug trafficking operation, the money laundering scheme, and the connections to organized crime. She emphasized Cartwright's role in protecting Sterling, highlighting the judge's corrupt rulings and his financial ties to the conspiracy. The grand jury listened intently, their faces grim. They understood the gravity of the situation, the threat that this network posed to their community. After deliberating for several hours, they returned with a verdict: indictments against Victor Sterling, Judge William Cartwright, and 10 corrupt police officers. Tasha felt a surge of relief. They had cleared the first hurdle, but she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Sterling and his associates would fight back, and they would fight hard. They had the money, the power, and the connections to make things very difficult for her and her team. As the news of the indictment spread, the city erupted. The public was outraged, demanding justice. The media was in a frenzy, reporting every detail of the case. Tasha became a symbol of hope, a beacon of justice in a city plagued by corruption. But she knew that her work was far from over. The real masterminds, the individuals pulling the strings from behind the scenes, were still out there, and she was determined to find them, to expose their crimes, and to bring them to justice, no matter the cost. The fight had just begun. The indictments were just the opening salvo. Victor Sterling, though facing serious charges, wasn't going down without a fight. He unleashed his vast resources, legal and otherwise, to discredit Tasha and dismantle the case against him. The threats started subtly, whispers in the corridors of power, veiled warnings delivered through intermediaries. But they quickly escalated. Tasha began receiving anonymous phone calls in the dead of night, her sleep punctuated by chilling voices promising dire consequences if she didn't back off. Her apartment was vandalized. A brick thrown through her living room window, shattering the glass and sending a clear message. She was being watched, and they weren't afraid to get personal. Jonathan, too, felt the pressure. His old contacts within the police force, the ones who had provided him with crucial information, suddenly became unavailable, their phones going silent. He was being iced out, cut off from his network of informants. He knew Sterling's influence reached deep within the department, and anyone who dared to cooperate with him was risking their career, or worse. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, urged Tasha to take precautions. "We need to be smart about this, Tasha," he said. "We're dealing with dangerous people. We can't afford to be reckless." He arranged for increased security for Tasha, assigning her a protective detail of off-duty police officers. He also advised her to vary her routine, to avoid predictable patterns that could make her an easy target. But Tasha refused to be cowed by fear. "We can't let them intimidate us, Marcus," she said, her voice firm. "That's exactly what they want. If we back down now, they'll win." She knew the risks, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to show any sign of weakness. She was a symbol of hope for the community, and she couldn't let them down. The threats intensified. One evening, as Tasha was leaving her office, she noticed a suspicious car parked across the street. She recognized it as the same car that had been following her for the past few days. She knew she was being watched. She quickened her pace, heading towards her car, but suddenly, the car sped towards her, its headlights blinding her. She swerved to avoid being hit, but the car swerved with her, its driver determined to run her down. She barely managed to jump out of the way, but the car clipped her leg, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. She felt a sharp pain in her ankle, but she knew she had to get away. The car screeched to a halt, and two men jumped out, their faces masked. They approached her menacingly, their eyes cold and ruthless. "This is your last warning, Ms. Williams," one of them said, his voice hard. "Back off, or next time, you won't be so lucky." Tasha lay on the ground, her ankle throbbing, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew they were serious. They were trying to kill her. But even in that moment of terror, her resolve didn't waver. She knew she couldn't give up. She had to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged by this corrupt system. She would not let them win. The attack on Tasha was a wake-up call. It made it clear that Sterling and his associates were playing for keeps. They weren't just trying to intimidate her, they were trying to eliminate her. The threat was real, and it was immediate. But instead of instilling fear, it ignited a fire within her. She wouldn't be a victim. She would be the one bringing them to justice. Marcus, deeply shaken by the near miss, became even more protective. He moved her to a secure location, a safe house far from her apartment, and insisted on round-the-clock security. He knew that Sterling wouldn't give up easily. "They'll come after you again, Tasha," he warned. "We have to be prepared." "I know," Tasha said, her voice resolute. "But I won't hide. I won't let them drive me underground." "That's exactly what they want." She insisted on continuing the investigation, even more determined to expose the full extent of Sterling's operation. She knew that time was of the essence. The longer they waited, the more dangerous things would become. Jonathan, still cut off from his usual sources, found a new lead. He learned that Sterling was planning a major drug shipment, a massive operation that would solidify his control over the city's drug trade. This was their chance to catch him red-handed. They needed to act quickly and decisively. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Tasha worked with Marcus to obtain a warrant for the shipment, coordinating with federal agents to intercept the drugs and arrest Sterling and his associates. The operation was meticulously planned. They set up a sting, waiting for Sterling's trucks to arrive at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Jonathan was on the ground, coordinating with the agents, ensuring that everything went according to plan. As the trucks arrived, the agents moved in, surrounding the warehouse. A fierce firefight erupted, with Sterling's men fighting desperately to protect their cargo. Jonathan was caught in the crossfire, narrowly escaping being hit by a stray bullet. After a tense and bloody battle, the agents managed to subdue Sterling's men and seize the drugs. Sterling himself was taken into custody, along with several of his key associates. It was a major victory, but Tasha knew that the war was far from over. As the news of Sterling's arrest spread, Tasha received a phone call. It was a familiar voice, cold and menacing. "You think you've won, Ms. Williams?" The voice said. "You're wrong. This is just the beginning." Tasha recognized the voice. It was one of the men who had tried to run her down. "We're not finished with you," the voice continued. "You've made a powerful enemy, Ms. Williams, and you're going to pay for it." The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Tasha with a chilling sense of dread. She knew that Sterling wasn't the real mastermind. He was just a puppet, a pawn in a much larger game. The real power brokers, the individuals pulling the strings from behind the scenes, were still out there, and they were coming after her. A few days later, Tasha received another call. This time, it was Marcus. His voice was urgent, filled with panic. "Tasha, there's been an explosion," he said. "Your safe house, it's gone. It's been bombed." Tasha's blood ran cold. She knew what this meant. They were escalating. They were sending her a message: back down, or die. The bombing of the safe house was a devastating blow. Tasha felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had put Marcus and Jonathan in danger, and now they were paying the price. She knew she couldn't afford to let fear consume her. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for them. She rushed to the scene of the explosion, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burnt debris. The safe house was a smoldering ruin, a testament to the ruthlessness of her enemies. She found Marcus and Jonathan amidst the wreckage, both shaken but miraculously alive. "We have to stop this, Tasha," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "They're not going to stop until they've silenced us all." "I know," Tasha replied, "but we can't give up now. We're too close." Jonathan, his face grim, nodded in agreement. "They've made it personal now," he said. "We have to make them pay." They knew they were being hunted. Sterling's associates, the real masterminds behind the operation, were desperate to protect their secrets. They wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to silence Tasha and her team. They decided to go underground, operating from a secret location, working in the shadows to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. They knew they couldn't trust anyone. The corruption ran deep, and they didn't know who was on their side and who was working for the enemy. Jonathan used his connections to find a safe house, a secluded cabin in the mountains, far from the city and its dangers. They knew they needed time to regroup, time to plan their next move. While they were in hiding, they received a tip. A source inside Sterling's organization was willing to talk, but only under certain conditions. He wanted immunity, protection, and a guarantee that his identity would remain secret. Tasha and Marcus worked with the authorities to arrange a meeting with the source. They knew this was a risky move, but it was their only chance to get the information they needed. The meeting was set up in a remote location, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Tasha, Jonathan, and Marcus arrived at the warehouse, accompanied by a team of federal agents. They were taking no chances. As they entered the warehouse, they were ambushed. Sterling's men, alerted to their presence, had set a trap. A fierce firefight erupted, with bullets flying and explosions rocking the warehouse. Tasha, Jonathan, and Marcus found themselves caught in the crossfire, fighting for their lives. They knew they had to get out of there, but they were surrounded. Jonathan, ever the seasoned detective, took charge. He led them through the maze of the warehouse, using his knowledge of the building to evade their attackers. They managed to escape, but not without casualties. Several federal agents were wounded, and Marcus was grazed by a bullet. They knew they had been betrayed. Someone inside their own ranks had tipped off Sterling's men. They couldn't trust anyone. They were on their own. But even in the face of this betrayal, Their resolve didn't waver. They were more determined than ever to bring down this corrupt network, to expose the truth, and to bring justice to the victims. They knew the risks, but they were willing to pay the price. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for justice. The ambush at the warehouse left Tasha and her team shaken but not broken. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, but they were in too deep to turn back now. The betrayal had stung, but it also clarified their focus. They could trust no one but each other. They were a team of 3 against a powerful and ruthless network, but they were united by their unwavering commitment to justice. They retreated to their mountain hideout, licking their wounds and regrouping. Marcus, though injured, insisted on continuing the investigation. He knew that time was running out. The masterminds behind Sterling's operation wouldn't sit idle by. They would be planning their next move, trying to cover their tracks and silence any remaining witnesses. Jonathan, ever resourceful, used his remaining contacts to gather information. He learned that Sterling had a secret offshore account, a hidden stash of cash that he used to bribe officials and fund his illegal activities. This was the key, the smoking gun that could expose the full extent of the conspiracy. Tasha knew they had to find that account, trace the money back to the masterminds. She worked with Marcus to obtain a court order authorizing them to access Sterling's financial records. They knew this was a long shot, but it was their only hope. While Marcus worked on the legal front, Jonathan focused on finding the connection between Sterling and the real power brokers. He knew that Sterling was just a middleman, a puppet being controlled by someone much more powerful. He suspected that the real masterminds were influential figures in the city, individuals with deep connections to the political and business elite. He delved into Sterling's past, examining his business dealings, his associations, his connections. He discovered that Sterling had been working with a powerful consortium of developers, a group of individuals who had been involved in several controversial real estate projects in the city. These projects were suspected of being linked to money laundering and other illegal activities. Jonathan also learned that Judge Cartwright was closely connected to this consortium. He had approved several of their projects, often overruling objections from environmental groups and community activists. This further solidified the link between Cartwright and the masterminds. The evidence was mounting. Tasha and her team were closing in on the truth. They knew they were facing powerful and dangerous adversaries, but they were determined to bring them to justice. Marcus finally managed to access Sterling's financial records. He discovered the offshore account, a complex network of shell corporations that led back to the consortium of developers. The money trail was clear. The masterminds were exposed. Tasha felt a surge of triumph. They had done it. They had uncovered the truth. They had found the evidence they needed to bring down the entire corrupt network. But she knew that their work was far from over. The masterminds wouldn't give up easily. They would fight back. And they would fight dirty. Tasha knew she had to be prepared for the final battle. She had to be ready to face the most powerful and ruthless individuals she had ever encountered. The fight for justice was about to reach its climax. The stage was set for the showdown. Tasha, armed with irrefutable evidence, prepared to confront Judge William Cartwright in open court. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The public, outraged by the revelations of corruption, demanded justice. The media was in a frenzy. Their cameras focused on Tasha as she walked into the courtroom, her face determined, her eyes blazing with righteous fire. Cartwright sat on the bench, his usual air of authority replaced by a visible unease. He knew the game was up. He knew that Tasha had him cornered. But he wasn't going down without a fight. Tasha began her presentation, laying out the case against Cartwright with meticulous precision. She presented the financial records, tracing the money trail from Sterling's drug operation to Cartwright's offshore account. She introduced the testimony of witnesses, detailing Cartwright's corrupt rulings and his connections to the consortium of developers. She played recordings of conversations between Cartwright and Sterling, revealing their conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Cartwright's carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled before the eyes of the courtroom. His face flushed, his hands trembled, and his eyes darted around nervously. Searching for an escape, he tried to defend himself, claiming that he was being framed, that the evidence was fabricated. He accused Tasha of a personal vendetta, attempting to discredit her and deflect attention from his own crimes. But his denials rang hollow. The evidence was too strong, too clear. The truth was undeniable. Tasha pressed her attack, exposing Cartwright's lies, dismantling his defenses, and revealing his true nature, a corrupt judge who had betrayed his oath, who had abused his power, and who had sold his soul for money and influence. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Cartwright as his world collapsed around him. He knew he was defeated. He knew that his reign of corruption was finally over. The jury deliberated for several hours, their faces grim as they weighed the evidence. When they returned, the verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty, on all counts. Cartwright's face fell. The color drained from his cheeks. He was no longer a judge, no longer a powerful figure. He was just a criminal, facing the consequences of his actions. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Tasha, his eyes filled with hatred and a desperate plea. "You haven't won," he hissed. "The real masterminds are still out there. They'll come after you. They won't stop until you're buried." Tasha stared at him, her expression unwavering. "I'm not afraid of them," she said, her voice firm. "I'll be ready for them." Cartwright's downfall was a victory. But Tasha knew that the war was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. She had exposed one piece of the puzzle, but the larger conspiracy remained. The masterminds were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. And Tasha knew that she had to be ready. She had to be prepared for the fight of her life. Cartwright's words echoed in Tasha's mind, a chilling reminder of the danger that still lurked. His arrest was a significant victory, a crucial step in dismantling the corrupt network, but it was just one battle in a larger war. The real masterminds, the individuals who had orchestrated the entire operation, were still at large. They were powerful, influential, and ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened their empire. Tasha knew she couldn't rest on her laurels. She had to be vigilant, to stay one step ahead of her enemies. She worked closely with Jonathan and Marcus, analyzing the evidence, following the money trail, and trying to identify the individuals at the top of the pyramid. They discovered that the consortium of developers was just a front, a facade for a much larger organization. The real power brokers were a group of wealthy and influential individuals, some of whom held positions of power in the city's government and business sectors. They were the untouchables, the individuals who operated in the shadows, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Tasha knew that taking them down would be a monumental task. They had the resources, the connections, and the influence to make things very difficult for her. They would use every legal and illegal means at their disposal to protect themselves. But Tasha was undeterred. She had come too far to back down now. She had seen the damage that this corrupt network had inflicted on the community, the lives that had been ruined, the trust that had been shattered. She was determined to bring these individuals to justice, no matter the cost. She worked with federal investigators, sharing the evidence she had gathered, collaborating on strategies to expose the full extent of the conspiracy. She knew that she needed help, that she couldn't do this alone. The investigation was complex and dangerous. They faced numerous obstacles, roadblocks thrown up by the masterminds to protect themselves. Witnesses disappeared, evidence went missing, and their efforts were constantly undermined by individuals within the system who were still loyal to the corrupt network. But Tasha and her team persevered. They were relentless, driven by their unwavering commitment to justice. They knew that the future of their city, the integrity of their legal system, depended on their success. The fight was long and arduous, a constant battle against powerful and well-connected adversaries, but Tasha never wavered. She was a force to be reckoned with, a U.S. attorney who wouldn't back down, who wouldn't be intimidated, and who wouldn't rest until justice was served. The story doesn't end here. The battle continues. The fight against corruption is an ongoing struggle, a never-ending war against the forces of darkness. But Tasha Williams, and others like her, stand as beacons of hope, warriors of justice, ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. They are the guardians of the law, the protectors of the innocent, and they will never stop fighting for what is right. The fight for justice goes on.